Yes, hello. This evening, the invited guest speaker of YÖMEGA Spring 2023 talks is Professor Naomi Petersen. She is a professor in the Department of Curriculum, Supervision and Academic Leadership in Central Washington University. She will talk on mobbability, understanding casualties of incivility in the academic environment. We are grateful that she's here tonight with us. And we are also hoping that Dr. Becky Pearson from Health Sciences Department of Central Washington University will join us. She's the co-author of their article on mobbing. Yes, welcome, Naomi. We are grateful that you are here with us.
I'm delighted to be here. And I can tell you that mobbability is a word that I coined. It did not exist before. So it'll be fun to explain it a little bit more. Let's see, making sure I have my computer here. I'm not in my office because it's snowing and and it's warmer in my own house, but this is what my students usually see. I teach most students online, and here's the landscape that we have when we don't have snow. We're in Eastern Washington with a traditional brick and mortar campus, except now we're increasingly online. And so quite a ways from you. But so it is 10 o'clock in the morning here, 8 o'clock in the evening where you are, but we have much in common. We would like to know about being vulnerable as academics. And what are the dynamics of why bullying occurs, specifically in academia? And how are we going to be able to maintain civility? So I encourage you to write in the chat if you have any thoughts or questions to bring up. I won't be able to monitor that until I stop this, but apart from specific acts of bullying, there are many reasons why someone is just vulnerable anyway. And so we won't get into things like intentional violence, which is a concern, of course. But everybody has many dimensions going on with intersectionality. And so it may be that you already feel, even before anything happens, you feel vulnerable because there is systemic bias based on your gender or some reason why some people may have some sort of a negative association with you because of this characteristic. And so if you happen to feel in a minority, like a bicycle, but the whole rest of the road is dominated by people who seem to be much more powerful, it can make you feel vulnerable to start with. And often those characteristics are going to be the start of the seeds of why someone might become a target because they already are vulnerable. It's a power differential. So mobbing is organized bullying. And often it appears that it is tolerated or even condoned by the management. So if you look at the workplace on a continuum, ideally you would have civility over here. But past just simple incivility, where people are rude to each other, when actual events start to target somebody, that would be mobbing. And if it is not resolved, the whole workplace is going to be affected. And so what we're interested in is the fact that we have two areas of vulnerability. The individual persons will be vulnerable, but the workplace itself is vulnerable. So you have mobbable targets because you have mobbable contexts. And what the target is revealing it. So when an individual has become bullied, that's telling you something about the whole environment, the health of the environment. So civility is the ideal. And this means that you have values based on productivity and collaboration. That sustains with civility. In the other direction, if the environment seems to emphasize control and competition and power, then you're going to have a bit more discord as people compete for that power. And it is in their best interest to undermine and damage somebody else in order to gain that power. So the degrees of mobbability are related to the values that the entire environment seems to be based on. So if you have a mobbing-friendly environment versus an anti-mobbing environment, right now you should be thinking about your own work environment and where do you think it is on this continuum. So we're taking an environmental view of this. The civility in the workplace society. This is a little bit similar to the public health of society. And since we have just been experiencing a pandemic, that's kind of a useful metaphor for us because the safety of the individual is directly related to the safety of the society. So we have ideal environments and everybody has these. It's fairly universal. And I was doing a little bit of research into Turkey because I don't know that much about your education system. But I saw that you now have a required course in the culture of religion and knowledge of ethics, I believe. And this was, anybody can cherry pick quotes and use them for any reason. But I did find that this was prescient to say that there should be no harming or reciprocating harm, which means the vengeance. Now that's the ideal environment, but we have vulnerable environments anyway. And every environment is at risk of contagion. And this is due to inadequate monitoring and oversight. Now I have children depicted here. And so it's much easier to deal with bullying in a controlled environment that schools would be where somebody is actually in charge. But in academia, we don't have that kind of supervision. So looking at the workplace, do you have the phrase there of the canary in the mine shaft? When you mine deep into the earth, there are gases that can be toxic and lethal. And so they would take along a bird, a small bird, and if the bird dies, that's a clue that the air is getting bad and you better get out of there. So they will sacrifice a canary in order to monitor whether it's going to be a safe environment. Well, this joke is saying that the administration is saying he's just sleeping. Now get down there and make me some money. And so the individual is saying, this appears to be a toxic work environment. So am I the next canary if it looks like other people are being hurt? And so is your workplace toxic? Are other people already being bullied? So one problem with mobbing is it's difficult to detect. It's because the bullies are very clever and they'll intentionally camouflage it. And another problem is people are so self-absorbed and they're rather naive about the significance, and they might not be aware of everything that's going on, and civility might not be defined. So we have this cloud of oblivion where people may appear to be indifferent, but they're just not paying attention to what's going on. So what I'd like to introduce to you is that for bullying to work, you have several intersecting stakeholders. The bully, of course. The minions would be colleagues who may or may not appear to be actively engaged in it. You have a target and you have the administration. So let's consider, you can recognize this. I imagine you've got Downton Abbey is on TV there. Maybe you've seen this story and others. In almost every story, you can recognize who tends to be the bully and who are the victims and who is the administration and somebody who's in charge. Well, what I'd like to point out is that each of these has got a survival perspective. The bully is focused on status and power within a very confined sphere. So my status inside this sphere must be protected. The colleague, I just need protection to survive. The administration is interested in the organization surviving. Now, this is what makes most victims different. The victim is saying, we could accomplish our mission by working hard together. Tends to be more of a growth mentality and a goal-oriented mentality, not a defensive mentality. So that's the irony, because the victim is the one who probably needs the defenses. So let's look at the bully's point of view. My status must survive and grow, so I will do whatever it takes for power or to maintain my position. And this is funny, because sometimes it's a privileged position that they haven't earned, and so they're easily threatened if somebody else is more competent. The organization is the context for my power sphere. They haven't necessarily engaged in the mission of the organization, but the power that they have within the organization is what they're interested in. And the colleagues, they either help or hinder me. So you're either with me or against me. You're either vulnerable or you're a threat. Any threat must be neutralized. Uh-oh. Sometimes people who are bullied or mobbed are particularly competent, and it makes other people feel threatened. So have you heard of a Machiavellian personality? So this is someone who is very ambitious, and they are so driven by keeping their position, whether it's a privileged and unearned position, but they have no empathy, because the end justifies the means. They don't mind throwing somebody under the bus or hurting somebody or sacrificing somebody if it helps their ends. They also have a tendency toward narcissism, where they're only thinking of their own point of view. And worse, there are people who have Schadenfreude, where they actually like to see other people suffer. So if a person tends to be rather optimistic and forgiving and naive about other people, it sometimes is not bad to remember that there are people out there who don't have that same ideal of peaceful coexistence. So you probably are familiar with the Shakespeare play of Othello. So I'm giving that as an example. Othello, he's working, he gets a promotion. Iago's not happy because he wanted to have that promotion. And so he starts to attack Othello, not directly, but his relationship with Desdemona. And so we have all these people, and Iago starts to focus on the people who support them. And so the little digs and undermining start, and it starts to have real consequences. People die, relationships die. It's messy. It's a wonderful example of subterfuge and bullying. Well, let's think about those minions that he got to do his dirty work. To survive, I need stronger people. I will align with whoever is stronger, and I'll watch how the wind blows to decide it. This is what is so disappointing to many people who are mobbed, is that they thought that people had more character and backbone, and they expected to come to their defense. The target's viewpoint is surprised. It's like, well, I'm loyal and I work hard. Everyone can see I'm good. The administration will support me because I support the mission. And we're all in this for the same purpose. We can rise above petty jealousies to unite for a common cause. Well, the leader has an even different point of view. I'll do whatever it takes for the organization to survive and grow. So as a classroom teacher, sometimes you're saying, now what? I just want the class to go on. So the administration is thinking, you're either helping or hindering. I have to balance the cost and benefit of every decision so that the organization can survive and grow. And if you just take care of business, the mission will take care of itself. Just do your job. So we know from self-regulation theory that every person needs to have identity, you have to have status, and you have to have approval, because that autonomy of having some choice and control of your own life is important. The skills are important, but the affiliation is important too. So when microaggressions start and people say, oh, just kidding, but it's put downs, and the gossip starts, the gaslighting or false news about somebody starts, ostracism, and even demotion, it all adds up to undermining what would be a sense of self. So we have a lot of threats to personal well-being when bullying happens. productivity is compromised, and you can recognize all of these symptoms: depression, doubt, fatigue, despair, but even more important, absenteeism. People distance themselves, and the worst case scenario, especially in schools, getting into the secondary schools, would be suicide, where someone feels there is no option, there's no way out. But this is also a threat to the workplace. The workplace will have reduced commitment, and the more you lose people, the more you have to recruit new people, you have to train new people. It undermines the whole organization if you have a little bit too much movement. It's good to have new blood and new movement and recruits. That's kind of a constant process of an organic and dynamic organization. But it's not good if the whole place feels like it's on life support. So let's look at the target. The target's baseline idea, as I said, is they see themselves as meritorious. They think other people will recognize their merit, and they think they will be supported because they are doing what they're supposed to do. But what happens when the targeted bullying starts? What is the target's first thought? Oh, I'm sure that wasn't on purpose. They just need to know the facts. This is just accidental. That's usually the first response. Then it continues, and they start to feel left out and distanced. They might appeal for help. And their thinking is, well, the truth will out. Once they know what's going on, the administration will do the right thing, and my colleagues will do the right thing. But gradually, when that support does not come, and in fact, the more they ask for support, the more people will tend to distance themselves, especially the minions who are concerned about their own survival. They start to retreat because they realize they're not going to get any support and help. And then it will start to compromise their performance, and sometimes they lose out on opportunities because of this gradual distancing. So the gossip happens, and the colleague may not be passing on the gossip, but they're thinking, at least it's not me. They might also be thinking that the victim deserves it. So the victim blaming is very common. It's a little bit like women who are victims of domestic violence. And the gaslighting is that their husband told them that they caused it. You made me hit you because of what you did. Or a woman who has been raped, they will say, well, you were dressed provocatively. You shouldn't have been out at night. And so that idea of saying, at least I'm safe, but it's your fault. The administration may just be fatigued themselves and say, oh my gosh, one more thing, now what? But the bully is saying victory and not a drop of blood on me. I got everybody else to do the dirty work of undermining this person I saw as being a threat. So in the chat, I would hope that you would be writing, is there anything that has been shared here that's resonating with you? I'm willing to bet most of it just feels like the blinding flash of the obvious. It's pretty common sense. But also, you may have some stories that illustrate mobbing, and that you're not alone. I'd like to point out that I talked about public health, but we have some lessons from epidemiology. Cholera is a terrible, terrible disease. Doesn't happen that often, but it especially happens when there are disasters. So I would imagine that in the earthquake areas, this is an example of something that we're concerned about. But it was a mystery when they first were trying to figure out what was going on. Well, whenever there's a huge upheaval, that's an opportunity to cultivate bacteria. Just like a bully likes it when things are uneven and not stable in the workplace, because that's where the opportunities are to divide and conquer. So John Snow is famous for his study of cholera. He was the first one to do this epidemiology study. where the cholera outbreaks were. And where you see these little blue faucets, that's where people had to go to get their water because there wasn't running water, pumped water into houses. And obviously, there are more cases around some of the pumps. And so he saw this pattern and said that must be the source of the infection in this area. So told people, you have to stop using that pump. Well, most people would say, well, I don't want to have to walk farther to get my water. That's an inconvenience. I don't want to have to do this. Or you can't see a germ. Are you sure that they're real? So his intervention was to actually remove the handle from the pump and to prevent people from using it. And there were death threats against him because people were so angry that the pump was not working. But he had to do the intervention. So the lesson from epidemiology is that the public is at risk of contagion. And first thing is you identify toxic sources and you establish a pattern, but then you have to intervene, and you can expect resistance from some people who are stakeholders, but you still have to educate and regulate. That's what we know from public health. So what does that mean in academia? You're at risk of contagion. And so for academic leadership, you have to identify the toxic sources, establish the pattern, intervene, but expect resistance, and you still have to educate. So Koo identified 5 phases of mobbing. You have a critical incident and the mobbing happens, the stigmatizing, but then there's some intervention, but the problem is the intervention misdiagnoses what's going on. So this is a failure of leadership because they confused bullying with simple conflict. They didn't really look for the underlying causes. And the easiest solution was to expel the target instead of solve the problem. So again, the leader's viewpoint is I'll do whatever it takes for the organization to survive. And they have to start thinking that if they sacrifice an individual person, they do sacrifice their organization. So there are several guidelines and we use them at different levels, but making sure it's monitored and taken seriously as an important part of their leadership. But they need to establish what the rules of civility are, and they need to follow up on contrary behavior. So to stop bullying, you have to realize that it's not just being civil. You have to be anti-mobbing, just like with racism. Anti-racism is different than simply not being a racist. So you notice when people are left out. You notice if gossip is going on, and criticism and innuendo is part of the natural culture there. And you start to suspect sabotage. You think, why is somebody spreading this information? What is their political goal from this? So if you have the strength to stand up and speak out, that's great. But it means that there has to be communication to start with. And we're at much, much greater risk now that we are isolated and we don't just have casual conversation with other people. We don't know who's talking to who behind the screen. So the concrete actions is making sure that you don't perpetuate any slander or defamation. But don't passively agree. If somebody else has something they have to say, you can interrupt that by simply saying, I didn't notice that. Are you sure? I haven't seen that before. And you just maintain your own integrity of saying, I'm not sure I would agree with that. That's your opinion, but also you don't ignore incivility. You just say, I think that's rude. So you can defend people and speak well of them and be very accurate about them, putting the best construction, like maybe they meant something different, let's ask them. But you refer to the civility guidelines. So we have 4 stakeholders, and maybe this is useful as a framework to try to understand a dynamic. And I think that it's fair to say everybody as an individual could be any one of these stakeholders. And they can also be perceived as these stakeholders. Sometimes you may think somebody is in a leadership role and they don't see themselves as being in the leadership role. It's not my job help take care of this. So I'm going to remind you that article that I left. Apparently that's what led you to contact me. So I'm delighted. It's one of the best outcomes of writing, is to establish that community. And I would like to point out that my colleague, Becky Petersen, she is the epidemiology, the public health. So I come from an education background. And so between us, we had these two lenses to be able to look at this same problem. And it led us to these insights. And so, are you feeling vulnerable as an academic? And what do you think the dynamics are? And how is it that you think you can establish and maintain civility in an academic area? And so, well, this is my area. I teach accessibility studies, which is recognizing the rights of people with disabilities. And but what I'm going to do now is say, simple fact, Discord is a lot more entertaining, and it's a little bit more difficult to get people there. Okay, I will stop the share here, and I will open up the chat. I see that quite a few people, I won't be able to read it as fast as you have written it, but let's hear what thoughts are occurring to you.
Do you think we'll close the talk? What do you think, Naomi?
Well, we usually leave the recording
I mean.
on. Yes, we usually leave the recording on because the discussion is the best way to digest the ideas. And it's with all humility, knowing I'm just throwing ideas out there. Now you have to chew them up and spit them out. And
okay, what do you think? Okay,
it would be the choice of all the people here if you want to.
okay, we'll continue.
Let's keep it on unless somebody specifically has a request to not
We
be
can
recorded for
do
their
it
class,
later.
whether it's
Yes.
Okay.
due to their institution, etc. But
Okay.
Any thoughts that are occurring to you? I'd love to hear them.
There are some comments on the chat. Maybe you will start with them. What do you think?
Yes. And Attila, I see you said the person being mobbed may actually be taking part in the act. You may become a willing partner to the act. Yes, people don't want to sacrifice the relationship that they do have. And so sometimes they will laugh at jokes and they might even perpetuate them. They start to have self-deprecating humor that almost feeds it. And they start to become the scapegoat, and that's just their role so that they can still be part of things, because that would be the worst thing, is complete expulsion. It's another reason why it's important to not be a tacit contributor. So, for instance, when a joke is made at the expense of somebody, or at the expense of a group that is associated with somebody, I think the easiest way to interrupt that is to say, I don't see the humor. Explain that to me. Why was that funny? So I see you have an anecdote here where we have two children. One is apparently they're being abusive, but it seems to be entertaining to them. I guess I can only think of you see tiger cubs and small puppies and things, and they look like they're play fighting. And so looking at children doing this, the corollary in academia is when people say they were just joking. And are they joking? And so it's bullying if the person who is the butt of the joke has less power. And so that would be your differential, I think, is who has the power. And if someone has some long-term damage from it. So what to do if the source of mobbing is the academic leadership, the department heads? Yes, some are pretty coercive in their leadership styles, and it goes back to what their values are. So if that's the environment to start with, one of your best defenses is to define what civility is, of saying that, is there supposed to be shared governance in this unit, for instance? Like, how was that decision made? So I guess it depends upon how vulnerable you are, whether you can challenge the way a decision is made, whether people have been engaged in it or not. But transparency is almost always going to be in your favor. And the most effective bullies do everything sub rosa, where it's not obvious what they're doing. So what you have to do is document and notice a pattern. So it's tedious, but to say, well, that's interesting. I got this email here and this email here and this email here, and the language changed between them. And in the intermediate things, something else has come. So putting those pieces together is often what you have to do in order to establish the pattern. Sometimes that when you have, I won't say a corrupt leader, but you have a manipulative leader, there appear to be favorites. They'll surround themselves with yes men, the people who would agree all the time, weak people to shore themselves up. And so you have to find your own strengths and alliances as well. Is this helpful? I'm not sure what's occurring to you. I don't see any other thoughts, but I should just open it up. Does the concept of thinking of those four stakeholders interacting, is that a helpful way of visualizing how to look for the pattern of someone, whether you can sort them into those different categories? Is somebody functioning like a minion who's just looking for alliances or anything else?
Well, as you noted, Naomi, in the working environment, people have certain relationships and they don't want to sacrifice those relationships. Even knowing the opinions and who they are, they still continue their association with them, because otherwise it would be even more detrimental.
Yes.
For one.
Well, and you would like to cultivate even more relationships. So being, well, the way our university is structured is we have different colleges, and within the colleges there are departments, and each department has a chair, and the faculty are affiliated with these departments. But sometimes what you teach overlaps departments. There's keen competition for the very few tenured faculty positions that are out there. So the question is, what are your ambitions? Is it to get a job? Is it to keep a job? Or is it to move up into administrative ranks? Or are you, say, in my case, I'm a director of a program, and so I'm very worried about cultivating that program and making sure other people want their students to be involved in it. So we have a lot at risk. If it's any help, we have a difference between faculty and what are called exempt positions. These are administrators, and administrators are actually more vulnerable. They don't have tenure. They can be they will tend to be even more power oriented of how they can maintain their power there. I was reading that mostly because we just had the International Day of Women, so I was kind of focused on that. It looks like about 25% of academics in Turkey are women, but many are graduating from universities than before, which is awfully good. But I bring them up because they tend to be the most vulnerable in trying to find any status within academia, because the traditional academia is going to be brutal. It's keenly competitive for very few resources, and it's very common that they're undermining other people. And so the irony is, this is speaking to something that's actually a culture of bullying. I mean, in my background, microaggressions are a sport of how you can give a backhanded compliment that is saying something that undermines somebody and always keeping people off guard. So this entire presentation is assuming that we would like to have a more civil and peaceful workplace, but some people, that's not their goal. Their goal is just to win. Like those two kids who are kind of play fighting in the store there. What they like is the competition part. If you look at sports, the goal is to play and have combat so you can win the combat. They enjoy the combat, and they're looking for sparring partners. And others of us, we just think, just leave me alone so that I can read my books and write my papers. And I don't like to have this conflict.
Yeah, I'm wondering actually, Naomi, based on your talk, your discussion just now, whether sort of managers or official action could be regarded as mobbing. I have two examples coming into my mind right away. Yesterday, it was in the news that BBC canceled the contract, or actually suspended one of its best paid presenters, because that person wrote a Twitter message, and where he said he is not agreeing with government's policy of policy decision based on migrators, the illegal migration. He was sacked. The second case is that maybe similar in that sense. One of the major basketball players years ago, this example, was being financed by, say, Coca-Cola. While he was presenting after the game a discussion of the past game, he happened to grab a bottle of Coke and drank a sip out of it and put back. But it just happened that the bottle was Pepsi bottle, and Coca-Cola canceled its contract with this person. Now,
I guess
yes, go ahead.
Well, those are examples where people exert their power for whatever purpose. Yeah. And it sounds to me like they're willing to sacrifice that person for whatever their purpose is. I guess what I came into this with the idea of mobbing is a bit more subtle, that there's someone who's trying to be a colleague and working in an environment that is supposed to be civil, and finds himself somehow the subject of gossip, the undermined, and feeling like they're being targeted as a convenient person to exclude or to serve a purpose. They like to have someone to be the scapegoat. That's a pretty common organizational dynamic like somebody tends to take on the role of being the joker. Someone takes on the role of being the policeman in the organization. And so they're looking for somebody who can take on the role of being the punching bag. And sometimes you walk into it and you say, I didn't sign up for this role. How come I'm being cast in this script to be this person? And so working yourself out of that role into a different role takes some deliberate effort on your part. And so what I would hope that anybody who has felt victimized and marginalized would take from this is that they can not fight fire with fire, but make themselves stronger by not being so naive, and by respecting the fact that most people are motivated by survival instincts, and give them the benefit of the doubt that it's nothing personal. They just happen to be there, but you have to actively say, this is not who I am, if that's helpful. It's a family. When you're in academia, you end up being feeling trapped in a family. And it's like any family dynamic. You got the crazy uncle, but you might have the real manipulative and abusive parent who's involved. And sometimes you have to distance yourself. So this is not an easy solution for anything. I guess if anything that I was just trying to share with you is that we can take some lessons from our different fields, like public health, the concept of contagion, the concept of intervention, the concept of having resistance to an intervention that's in someone's best interest, but being able to step back and look for a pattern in how someone takes on a relationship with everybody.
Mehmet Hocam asks a question, sorry, Naomi, in the chat. Can you see?
Let's see, you're having trifocals here. Okay, you're right. Academic people are expected to be more civilized since they're more educated people. I think what implied but not stated is they're expected to be rational. They're expected to base decisions on verified information and on taking data and things like this. And yet at the same time, they are normal people who are more emotional for the most part. And that gut reaction is what happens with survival. So if somebody's survival is triggered and that bully thinks that you're threatening their position, then it's not rational. They're just fight or flight. That amygdala has just been triggered, and they're not going to be functioning. Also, we know from studies of belief systems, belief revision is not easy, especially when it comes to your identity. And so if someone has an identity of seeing themselves, well, I'm always the one who makes a decision here, or everybody looks to me for an opinion, I have this status here, they're offended greatly if somebody else's opinion is even sought. So they become very, very fragile and brittle. And they will start to insist, well, this is the way we've always done it. This is what the law is. And so they will draw on the resources of the organization to support their position and be very resistant to any development or growth. So academics are notoriously conservative of perpetuating the canon and maintaining that. Ironically, academics are supposed to be researching new things and having innovations going on. So the irony is you come up with a great idea, but is it actually ever implemented? The big difference between a great idea and taking action. So I guess I would hope to empower people that you can take action mostly with your own integrity, of saying, I did not see the pattern. And that's based on an academic and scientific concept of rigor, of saying, I don't make a decision unless I've seen the evidence. Is that helpful? I'm obviously just sharing my
Yeah, I have another point. Sometimes these bullies, they are not doing the behavior directly or talking directly to the person who is bullied.
mhm.
They are sending other people
Yeah.
or other cases on them.
They're polluting the atmosphere around them.
So when you look at the patterns, there is no patterns from them. So you cannot say that they are the bullies.
Mhm. Well, establishing a pattern of systemic exclusion, one way to look at it is who's missing from this picture. So who was not invited to this meeting? Who is not consulted for making a decision? And so being the quiet one who says, before we make this decision, we need to have the other perspectives in here. So that's saying that's a tenet of civility, is to have consensus. So do we have consensus? So I'm assuming that consensus is something that is valued or purported to be valued in your organization. So you rehearse the language of holding people accountable as it happens. And that's frustrating because it's finding a way to do that without being confrontational. Saying, oh, let the minutes show that so-and-so was not here to speak up about that program. Or it's just being very documented and holding people accountable. Those are skills of a sophisticated operative. If you can establish that while there is a tide of, I just don't want to bother something. So I guess one of the humbling things is to look in the mirror and say, I guess I'm functioning like a minion. I guess I am not showing any backbone or integrity. I'm just being fearful, and I want to align with whoever's powerful, even if they are unethical. So I know that that's a cultural difference too. We hear a lot about the difference between collectivist societies and individual westernized societies, of saying individuals is important. But the truth is, nobody wants to be completely isolated or excluded. So it's useful if you have some tenets of civility that your organization all agrees with, and they should be in writing, of saying we make decisions this way and we don't tolerate slander. I'm repeating myself, I know, I'm sorry. So that was a comment from, is it Mehmet Kaglar?
Attila.
Have I said your name accurately there?
Attila.
Okay, and I was reading here.
Mehmet Çağlar.
Mehmet Çağlar.
Previous
Okay.
question. Naomi,
Yes.
I'm wondering about the part the leadership should play in the case of mobbing. How the leadership should sort of discover cases of mobbing, how the leadership should go after correcting the situation, or if at all it's possible.
Well, the leader,
as-
first of all, has to want it to be a civil workplace. And as you said, sometimes the leader is the one who is manipulating and instigating this. And it's like a chess set, you know, I'm going to sacrifice this pawn in order to get this. And they're not thinking about the well-being of each individual in their organization. So it's a mindset to start with for a leader to want each person to be successful. But as far as the mobbing itself is not to confuse the victim with incompetence, because sometimes they're being set up to look like they're not doing something. For instance, they move the time of the meeting so it looks like you showed up late. Or there's so many subtle ways to make you look less competent.
Yeah.
So if it appears that their competence is, you have to first of all suspect, is there something happening? So you have to suspect sabotage. So first thing, is this person possibly being targeted? And so the other part is establishing what civility is. Saying, if it's a leader who likes to hear tales of coming and wants other people to say who's doing something wrong,
Doing what?
and that's a leader who is contributing to that,
Inviting
a more discord. So it's, the leader can also invite positives. So you say, tell me what your colleagues are doing well. And that's unusual in some places, but for a leader to say, I want to hear what people are doing well, or how did you solve a problem? And let's hear a shout out for anybody who did something that contributed well. So sometimes it's, you only hear glory of saying they presented at this conference or they published something. But if it gets down to the everyday of saying, what were the victories in getting through this term? We also have a culture of competition where you want to be the most favorite professor compared to students. And what is really undermining in academia is when a professor seems to undermine colleagues to students, where they want the students to prefer them, or they feel some satisfaction when a student seems to like them better. And that's unethical, but it's a reality that some people are competing for that. So as far as the administrator, it would be, who do you want to hear tales from, and for what purpose? You have another complication if an administrator used to be a colleague and was promoted to say leadership within some area. Sometimes they become a target of mobbing because people resent the fact that they now have a bit more power or something. And they're like Iago in Othello. They're not hearing the logic of why someone deserved the promotion. They're just angry, and that they're not functioning rationally. So I feel like what my response is partly, yeah, it's terrible. It's not good. It's not easy, but I think you have more power when you have more power if you can notice the pattern.
Yeah. Well, if there's no other question, I have another comment to make in continuation to this. The other day I watched a movie. In this movie, a boy who's about 30s has a friend, a buddy, who is slightly estranged. I mean, very, very friendly, but not so bright person. They go together. This boy's family, all members of the family, talk of this boy as being sort of useless person. Up to this age has not achieved anything. No work, no academics, no nothing. He's sort of fed up with this situation. Together with his friend, he decides to make a big stealing case out of the Mexican major museum of Aztec artifacts. He manages that, though too. But then they try to sell the pieces. They could not, because the pieces are so precious. No one is willing to pay any money for it. so they are worthless for those two guys. Eventually, this man decides to give back the pieces stolen, takes them to the museum, and makes a case that he gets caught. He got caught, and that way he sort of became a hero of the famous museum robbery, because news agents, news media were mentioning that this could be case of a international mobs, museum pirates. It cannot be a simple case, and so on. Whereas those two guys did the tasing, did the stealing. What I come to at the end is that people who are mobbed to a corner where they have no way to go,
Mhm.
you may expect them to do something irrational, something extraordinary, to prove themselves that they are worth of whatever that is to be done.
So again, it gets down to a survival point.
Instinct,
I've worked
yes.
with a lot of children who've been expelled from school because of weapons violations. And in almost all cases, they had been bullied and they just wanted people to leave them alone.
Yes.
But unfortunately, it was illegal to bring
Yes.
a knife or a gun to school. But they often, then they were expelled from school and put in an alternative school or something. And many of them were just so relieved to not have to be going to school. In the pandemic, there are kids who say, I'm never going to go back. It's hell. I don't want to do that. So we do have to rethink what our, whether the environments, a workplace for a child is going to be the school, feed into these opportunities for bullying and kind of perpetuate them. And we have to be very sensitive that some people are escaping, so they self-medicate or drugs or become all retreat into the oblivion of depression or well, for whatever reason. And so getting back to your original question about what a leader does, they should notice the patterns of their people and say, does somebody have a pattern of withdrawal or anything there?
Yes.
The,
Thank.
sorry.
Well, my
But-
friends, I worry. I mean, this is a fascinating conversation, and I'm sorry just to visit just the once. I would love to be in contact and hear from you. You
Yeah.
have my contact information, and I'll be glad to send you the slide deck, the PDF of the
Yes,
slide
thank
deck
you
if
very
you'd like
much.
to.
Yeah, we are
Um,
grateful. It was a great talk. Tufan Hocam, do you have anything to comment, or Hatice Hocam? The other two people, yeah, yes, participants. Any comments or questions from you? I think it's okay.
We won't put you on the spot to.
No,
proceed
thank you.
with-
They said, okay. Thank you very much. It was great talk. Attila says it is passive.
Yeah,
Passive
Yeah,
withdrawal.
withdrawal. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Who's missing? Yes.
Okay.
Well,
they
thank
are,
you so much. I appreciate the invitation. It's been delightful.
Yes, we are also, we appreciate. Thank you very much for coming and enlightening us about this. We know what to do now. And,
Well, I would
thank you.
love to do something to maybe do a cross-cultural comparison of what the experience is in academia, because we do have different structures for higher education, and it's different which students are there and what our paths are there. It would be very interesting. I'm sure that there is a lot already out there, but I haven't delved into it, and I think I'll have
Yeah,
to.
it can be a great work. Yeah. One of our participants, she left now because I think she has something to do. She was also working on this. I will tell also to her. I'll share
Yes.
your idea with the group members of YÖMEGA. It will be a nice study.
All right.
Yeah.
And if you're ever in
Okay.
Washington, come see me.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you come to Turkey or Cyprus,
I would love to.
My favorite state, Washington.
Okay, bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hocam iyi ki geldiniz. Sağ olun. İyi akşamlar.
Çok teşekkürler.
Görüşürüz.
Çok teşekkürler
Mehmet Hocam,
Ali Hocam.
iyi